This module, Module 1, Unit 3, covers the unique interests of qualitative research or the common interests that we have in qualitative research. This is a brief module just to introduce you to some of the topics you'll hear in subsequent modules. So the learning objectives of this brief module are to provide an introduction to at least 3 unique concerns that we have in qualitative research, to explain how a researcher's position with respect to the research question, the data that's produced in the qualitative research, and the research participants matter. So how we come to the research matters in qualitative research and quantitative, but uniquely to qualitative. And another learning objective is to really help you detail the ways in which qualitative researchers attend to issues of representation and a voice. So when we think about qualitative research, 3 common issues come to mind. So positionality, the position of the researcher with respect to the research question, the research participants, and the worldview of that researcher. The second issue is issues related to representation and voice. So qualitative research is often brought up in the context of social justice research or community engaged research because it allows for the voice to be heard of research participants or representatives of populations that might not be represented fully in other kinds of research. And the last one is some unique issues around subjectivity versus objectivity. So with respect to researcher positionality, qualitative research is very different from quantitative research in that it really rejects this idea that researchers must be detached from their research. So in quantitative research, we talk a lot about the importance of objectivity and of avoiding bias. So we tend to talk about staying outside of the research and making sure that our research data is produced in a standardized kind of clean, controlled way. So in the first module, we talked about how a randomized clinical trial or a randomized controlled trial is really the gold standard in more traditional positivist quantitative research because that control and standardization is really important to the production of the data and to the testing of the hypothesis. What's different in qualitative research is that the qualitative researcher can actually engage themselves in the research, and that can increase the quality of the data that are produced. So some of the things we want to think about with qualitative research is because we might engage in the production of data, which will form the basis, form the evidence for our knowledge production, we want to think about position with respect to the community, the research population, from which the data are taken. So as a community health scientist, as a community-based participatory researcher, I think a lot about residents in neighborhoods. So I think a lot about my positionality with respect to this particular neighborhood, group of people whose identities are common in that they live in a particular community. But if I'm engaging in other kinds of research, like I do a lot of research on bladder health, how people think and experience the bladder, we want to think about what do I know about this phenomena, how have I experienced this phenomena, to what degree do I have similar experiences to the people who are engaging in research with me, why or why not. And so this brings up a lot of issues about social identity and power and positionality, and insider and outsider issues. So if I'm an outsider to a particular research, why is that? By what measures am I outside? How does my social identity differ from those who are engaging in the population? And these are important things to think about because our goal is to produce the highest quality data, and we want to reduce the risk of our engagement cluttering the production of rich quality data. So in some cases, if I'm very close to the phenomena of interest, my involvement will be very important for me to be close to the production of the data. If it's a phenomena that I'm less familiar with because of my social identity, because of my lived experience, I might stay outside more, and I might engage, for example, in community-based participatory research and identify people who have had more of that experience to be more engaged. So this research positionality is very important in qualitative research for us to think about. The second issue that's really important are issues of representation, inclusion, and voice. Like I said before, we're very interested in qualitative research, particularly community-engaged qualitative research, to be an opportunity to have voices heard that have typically been excluded from our research endeavors. So we have some innate concerns when we produce the data about whose data are these, whose knowledge is represented, and whose story. So these issues can be very complicated from an IRB and an ethics perspective, because when we're engaging in participatory research, for example, we can be very close to the people who are experiencing the phenomena and produce the data that then is typically owned by the institution, by the academic institution. And so we want to make sure we create research infrastructure so that we can share ownership of the data to the greatest degree possible. So in qualitative research, this is an opportunity for us because voice is so important and representation is so important to be inclusive. And so this allows us to really include the experiences, the stories, the voice of populations that, for whatever reason, have been left out of mainstream research. This can be due to issues related to distrust of medicine, of research, of science. This can be because of issues related to institutional racism and discrimination that systematically kind of keep people outside of spaces in which you might engage in research. So the third issue that's kind of uniquely of interest in qualitative are these tension between subjectivity and objectivity. And qualitative research has a different philosophical orientation to this idea of objective facts. And so I just wanted to run through a couple of these ideas we brought up in the first module. And in order to do this, we need to be reminded of what is ontology and what is epistemology. So ontology is really thinking about what is real, what can be known, and how can we know it. So ontology is the way that we view the world. Now, epistemology has more to do with what it means to know, how and what can we know, and who can be a knower. So how should we investigate the world based on how and what we can know? And epistemological awareness is an essential prerequisite to a critical health equity research agenda. And the reason is that it impacts our research question, are the issues that are priority to us in our problem statement, the way that we formulate our questions, and it impacts what methods we use, what methodology we use, how we sample for research participants, and research design. So how we should investigate the world, this question, is really based on how we see the world and our position with respect to the world. And so this is a really different philosophical foundation that has this, that changes this tension between subjectivity and risk of bias and objectivity. In the first sets of modules, we talked about objectivity being based on this idea that facts can be known, that there are objective facts, and most ways of qualitative research actually suggest that people construct their own experiences, and there isn't one single knowledge that we can identify. So that really modifies the way that we think about subjectivity and bias. This is an image that shows the complexity of qualitative research. One of the things we want to emphasize is how diverse qualitative research is. So people with a social constructionist worldview, or claiming a social constructionist lens, really think about reality as socially constructed and try to engage in approaches and methods that are more inside, more emic to the phenomena of interest. That will produce the higher quality data, the more rich insight in data. People who come from a more post-positivist worldview, where reality is governed by law. So here on the left side, we might have a more traditional approach to the production of knowledge. emphasizing more the production of facts that can then be interrogated. So this is just a visual that shows the complexity of how we think about what can be known and how we move forward with trying to create an infrastructure to produce knowledge to know something. This is Module 1, Unit 3. You can go on to the quiz and then move on to the next module. Thank you.